Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Extraordinary Family Life Podcast. We've got a doozy for you today.
Well, first we have to tell what happened, though, because 2 days ago we sat down to record a podcast episode.
Which is coming, and it's going to be really good.
It was actually going to be on ADHD because I did a reel on Instagram, and I got some very interesting comments.
And I absolutely abhor that label, and we'll get into that. So
we'll talk about that. If that's not a cliffhanger, I don't know what is. We recorded for like 45 minutes and then realized it had only captured 32 seconds of it. So that was quite frustrating. But we're going to come back to that because in the meantime, something else has sparked our passion. And that's what we're going to talk about today. And for those of you who have already listened to all of our podcast episodes about sex, which there's at least 4 of them, here we are again. We're doing another episode about sex. And that's because I just feel like we have to say something. I feel like we have to speak out. I feel like ideas are being presented and taught on social media. I mean, all over the place, even in counseling, by therapists, by doctors, that just aren't true. And I know that that's a very bold statement for us to make, but when I look at pragmatic application, when I look at the things that actually work in the relationships of people who actually have really great relationships, it doesn't match up with whatever the research or this or that or the other says or what people are teaching. And so that's really what we're looking at is what actually works, what actually creates great relationships.
Yes, because results don't lie.
Exactly.
And you might think, and people have said this to us, like, well, what are your credentials, Dennings? What gives you, the authority or credibility to speak about this? And again, my whole approach always has been, ours has been for anyone and everyone, like results.
Yeah.
If you can produce consistent results
and teach them to others so that they
get consistent results. And you don't, this isn't consistent results at the sacrifice of everything else. Because somebody could say like, well, yeah, I make millions and millions and millions of dollars. Oh, but your marriage is falling apart, your health is falling apart, you have no spiritual life, your kids hate you. Then, well, your method sucks. But if you have consistent results across the board that are replicable without sacrificing the other important areas of your life, you've got credibility. You have something to share.
Yes. And I think that while the reason why we are talking about this again is because we're seeing people share ideas that are not playing out well in the real world. It's the people that are teaching these things that if you actually put it into application, specifically in this case, which I'm going to share in just a minute, it's destructive to relationships. Now, okay, I think we'll just dive into what.
Well, wait, let me give a metaphor or comparison. There's a lot, tons, too much teaching out there that is comforting to hear.
Yes.
People are teaching things that you want to hear because you're like, because it feels good to hear it. And you think, and you guys know this already, right? You've experienced it, you've seen it. You're out there and you want to be told things that you're like, oh, yes.
It's almost like a confirmation bias.
Right.
Like, I want to believe that this thing is true.
We want the easy way. And so if somebody tells you there's a pill you can take to lose all this weight, you're like, oh, yes, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
You mean I don't have to transform my life and do all this hard work?
I don't have to change?
I don't have to change anything. I can take a pill or have a surgery. Or, again, health and fitness is the easy one because we all get that. There are all kinds of health and fitness people out there saying, no, you can totally eat all the pizza you want. You can still have junk food and snack food. You still have fast food and lose all the weight. They're saying things like that because that's what people want to hear. The reality is that the hard result reality is like, it just doesn't work. It's not sustainable and it's not healthy. So even if somebody tells you something you want to hear, like to hear,
right.
Like, oh, I can be healthy and eat French fries. Of course you want to hear that because you like French fries.
Exactly.
But the
And
truth is, it's not healthy, period.
Right. And so I think this is actually very relevant. And I think it definitely ties into my own personal experience. So I'm going to tell people what we're talking about now so they're not continuing to be confused. Essentially, I was on Instagram, which I do for my work, and I saw a reel. And you know how they use these audios in the background? It was like, show me the myth, show me the fact, or whatever. And so she's pointing in this video, in this reel, to the myth and the fact, and the text comes up there. The myth is sex is a need. The fact is, I don't even remember what the fact is, but it doesn't matter.
Sex is a desire.
Oh, sex is a desire.
Just one way to communicate, something
exactly.
like that, or connect.
And my immediate thought was, okay, I get it, because I truly do understand, and I want to talk about that in a minute, this desire women have to believe that sex is not a need. Okay, so I want to come back to that, but then I also
on that point though, I've never ever heard a man say sex is not a need.
Okay, well, we'll get to that for sure. Okay, we're gonna get to that for sure. But then I thought, no, this isn't true, because if you want to have, oh wait, in the caption it said, and we've heard this before, this isn't the first time we've heard this, this has come from other well-known sex therapists, etc. Sex is not a need. Needs are things like air, water, food. And I first of all, I hate that reasoning, because it makes no sense in the context of what you're trying to talk about. We're not talking about surviving here. You're literally talking about having a sexual relationship with someone, or an intimate relationship with them, and you're trying to say, well, it's not a need, just like food is a need.
So your argument is so irrelevant.
To extremes.
Yeah.
And then on the same pretext, in the same context, you could say, well, fidelity is not a need. Communication, talking is not a need. These are all desires. I desire you to be committed to me. I desire you to talk to me. But
in that context, like, marriage is not a need.
Right, exactly.
Being happy, having a good relationship, like getting along, not a need.
Yeah.
Like having a peaceful, loving, enjoyable, passionate, romantic, amazing best friend marriage, not a need, Rachel.
Exactly. Right.
And so, it's food and water and shelter.
Right. And so I feel like it's such a poor argument, because it doesn't make sense in the context you're trying to explain. If you're trying to say, I want to have a great relationship, which in a way I think that's ultimately what they're trying to say. I want to have a great relationship, therefore I'm going to believe that sex is not a need for my spouse, because I feel whatever XYZ when my spouse needs sex.
Maybe not. Maybe, and I'm saying this because, you know, we've coached so many people and met and worked with and talked to so many people around the world. We assume, because we want to have an extraordinary marriage, we assume that others do.
True.
Maybe not. I meet people who they're just absolutely committed to being single, or they're committed just to being, you know, having roommate status with their spouse.
Well, okay, that's
they're not into extraordinary marriage. And so this argument might be, let's just get rid of this problem. There's an annoyance in my marriage. My husband wants to have sex.
Right.
And that's annoying. Let's put a stop to it.
Right. By believing and teaching that your need for sex is a myth, so you just need to get over that, which is extremely, like you said,
referring to men, like a man's need. And so,
and I also want to be clear that, because part of the argument from this person that posted is that, well, that's so gender specific. You're putting people in these traditional roles that just aren't. Yep. I'm sorry, we're going off statistics here. Generally, not 100%, but generally, men want sex more than women, although there are women that want sex more, and vice versa. So, but if you're going off the bell curve here, yes, most men want sex more. So that's what we're talking about. But
and they also, as long as they're healthy, a man who is eats well, sleeps well, and is in good shape has a strong sex drive, right? Now, like, there's a subtle distinction here, because some women desire sex more, and you might even call it a sex drive, right? They call it, how do they refer to it? It's some want it more than others, higher
Libido.
Higher, lower? No, I can't remember. There's a term for it, but in just pure genetics, in pure like looking at
Biology.
evolutionary biology, a male is driven, has a genetic drive hardwired into his body to seek out females and reproduce.
Well, right. That's the ultimate biological cause of that desire is reproduction.
And it's everywhere in the animal kingdom. I mean, it's all over the place. So it's also an absolutely absurd argument to be like, that's so biased, and it's like, this rooster, why does the rooster have to be on top of the
Just
hen?
yesterday, okay, we're moving from our house here in one part of Portugal to another part of Portugal, and we took our chickens with the rooster from here to the new place, and we let them out. And what's the first thing the rooster does when he gets there? He hops on top of the girl. Like, I missed you, babe. We're back together. That's just biology. That's just how it works, okay? So let's back up here. So essentially, I felt the desire because I've started to believe that I need to speak out against things. I can't just let it go and be like, oh, yeah, that's true. Especially when it's connected to things we coach about and teach about and all that. So all I did is I reposted it on my story, and then I responded with my own comment, which was essentially like,
Yeah, read your comment. It was really
I
good.
will read my comment.
If you want to have a great relationship with your spouse, then there are needs uh, for that thing. And again, gosh, I don't know this person, and I don't know what's going on, but this argument seems to me, when you look at it, when you look at the big picture of everything, when you look at something holistically, and you guys know us, that's what we do. And if you're new to us, that's what we do. We look at everything holistically. We try to take the entire package. So if you're talking about marriage, a man and a woman, husband and wife having a great marriage, you can't just look at one element and be like, well, it's just this thing. You have to look at the entire package. Well, if you look at the entire package, there are tons of human needs. And so for somebody to come out with an argument of like, you don't need sex, all you need is food and water, like that, it just comes across as so absurdly ignorant,
Well,
and really unaware of the other needs, starting with Maslow's hierarchy of
yeah, that's what I
needs,
was going to say.
that entire pyramid of needs, and you go to the what's been referred to as the 6 human needs.
Right. So if you look just at that, if you look at the hierarchy of needs, well, obviously we know that to be fully developed, happy human beings, you don't just need food and water and the basic survival things. That's the very lowest part of his hierarchy of needs.
That's just to only stay alive.
Right, that's to stay alive. Exactly. Okay, I did find the comment finally. I basically said it depends on how you define need. For survival, no, sex is not a need. For connection, bonding, and love, yes, it is a need. Can you imagine if your husband said, you don't need me to talk to you, it's just a desire, and then went days, weeks, or months without talking to you because it's not a need? You would feel pretty neglected. So if you want an extraordinary relationship, then sex and talking are needs.
Beautiful. Okay, there's so much going on in my mind too. For survival of the species, sex is a need,
Right.
and that kind of go back to biology. But then on this other need thing, this was years and years ago. It would never be allowed now, thankfully. But years and years and years ago, there was an orphanage. I think it was in Russia, and they were overwhelmed. They didn't have the staff to hold the children and cuddle them and give them affection. The children who didn't get held and hugged and kissed and coddled and talked to died. They were given food, they were given water, they were giving the basic needs for survival, and yet they died.
Yes. But according to her argument, and I totally agree with this, well, yeah, so that's the essential human need is love and connection, which does not have to include sex. So, because she responded to my post that I put on my story, referring to sex, it's actually not a need. Love, belonging, and connection are, which you just pointed out in that example. All of those things are needed, but not sex. That's why you can go periods without sex and still feel close in other ways. Postpartum, health issues, older age, etc. First of all, let me address that.
Only a woman would say that.
So that was actually the part I was going to say. Because yes, there's truth to that statement. You can go periods of time without sex and still feel close in other ways. Yes.
Yes.
But
agreed. Even as a man, I'm going to say yes, I agree. In fact, I know some guys who they were injured in severe accidents and cannot feel anything from their belly button down. So they don't have sex and they still have a great connection with their wives.
Yes, exactly. And I think that that's her point. That's what she's arguing to. But I also believe that inevitably there still is something that's missing. You can make your relationship as great as possible with those quote unquote limitations, but you're still going to be limited. As in another crazy example, say I went deaf or something, or you went deaf and I couldn't talk to you because you couldn't hear me. We're going to go a period of time where we can't communicate in the way we had previously communicated. I guarantee you I'm going to feel a void. And I think that the same is true for men.
Even if we learn sign, I'll be able to see you communicate, but hearing your voice will create a void.
Right. And so I think that back to the whole point of you and I being idealists, which is essentially what we are, and we get it that not everyone can live to the ideal. We fully get that. We know that there are circumstances out there where you cannot live to the ideal. And maybe that's who this person is talking to. And that's great. That's good.
But that's rare. That's going to be less than 1% of people.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know what the percentage is, but it is going to be more rare than not. Because the reality is, I believe that for the majority of people, if you follow the practices that just work, you will create incredible relationships. And so one of the things we have learned through our own, and that we've also taught to other people, knowing that it works because they've gotten similar results, is that there are certain strategies, certain habits, certain practices you do to create an extraordinary relationship. And one of those is having more sex, not less. Like that's, I guess, ultimately what it comes down to me for. If you want to have a really great relationship, you actually have more sex, not less. Now, that doesn't mean that if there's periods of times when you can't have sex, that now you have no relationship.
But again, those arguments are
they're meant to be rare.
And you set them aside. They're not even a part of the conversation because you're like, okay, I get massively injured in my package. Well, yeah, we're not having sex because, like, I'm injured.
Right.
My member is
what
hurt.
Which is what happens to a woman after postpartum.
Right. Okay. I mean, so she gives birth, like there's an injury, so to speak, and you're like, that's just not healthy or comfortable or anything. So of course, we're not going to have sex during that time. But that's not even a part of this argument. Like arguing to the exceptions, arguing to the rare moments of those things, it doesn't help. So we set those aside. Like, you don't need sex to, if I go a month without sex, I'm not going to die. Okay, that's just an irrelevant argument. Set that aside. Well, you can't have sex right after postpartum. Yeah, that's an irrelevant argument. Set it aside. We're talking about when your health,
the rest of life.
For the rest of life, 99% of life. We're talking about that.
Right. And I think that if you take that argument of like, oh, well, we can connect in other ways besides sex during those times, so therefore I should take that and apply it to the rest of my life.
Right.
Well, that
no way
doesn't work, especially for men.
Yep.
And I guess that's what I'm trying to point out in a way is that, yes, during those other times, we connected in other ways after I had babies or whatever without sex. But that doesn't mean that in your case, and I would say even mine, especially mine might be longer period of time than yours. You might feel a void after a day,
24 hours,
a week,
sometimes less.
And for me, it might be weeks, but there will be a void that is felt. And so to ignore that void and to say to you, do you know what, husband? It's not a need. And okay, I've literally heard people say this in my presence. Well, your sex drive is just basically something that you need to learn to overcome.
Mm-hmm.
You need to learn how to deal with it because it's a myth that you need sex. That's just absurd to me. First of all, it's totally disrespectful to you as a person.
Yep.
You're trying to communicate to me, and this has happened in our marriage, what you're feeling, what you're experiencing. Now, I do know that there was a period of time when I felt overwhelmed by that, pressured sometimes, burdened by it. Exactly. But that doesn't mean that it just goes away for you because I feel burdened by your need for sex.
And it's Rachel and I were laughing last night because it's often one-sided, as though only the woman gets burdened by the husband's needs.
Exactly.
I was like, have I ever felt burdened by your needs?
Exactly.
Are you kidding me? Like, Rachel and women have tons of needs that they want and need to be thriving and healthy. Great. That's my responsibility as,
or quote unquote burden
as your husband. Again, let me throw down here. I get so fired about this. I asked Rachel to marry me. The moment she said yes, there was a contract made. We didn't write it on paper. It wasn't official. We didn't go to the notary. When she said yes, there was a contract made that I would do everything in my power to meet all of her needs, not just food and water and shelter, that I would meet all of her needs,
mental,
to be
emotional, spiritual,
thriving, fully actualized, to use Maslow's word, a fully actualized woman. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of needs. And so I've got to do that. I've got to meet all those needs. And because I asked her and she said yes, she has every right to demand those of me, that I have to level up. I have to provide in every way possible. And guess what? Yes, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of burden. There are times where I'm doing things for her that, you're like, well, I'd rather be doing something else. I'd rather be sleeping right now because I'm exhausted and you're still talking, or whatever else it is, right? But you're like, no, I committed to be your husband.
And unfortunately, I think too many women, especially today, feel this sense of entitlement that their husbands should do all of that. And yet they can say to them, oh, your need for sex is just a desire.
Right.
And I don't have any obligation to fulfill that.
Right. And it's easy to do that as a human being. Think, well, mine are needs because I feel this intensity. Mine are needs. Yours are just desires.
Right.
And that goes both ways. Right. You don't need to talk in your example. Rachel and I love to talk, and she feels like she needs to talk to get things out loud and to cry. And I could be like, you don't need to cry, because I don't have that need to cry. So I could assume she doesn't either. Or I could stop and say,
and then it's turned around the other way. Well, I don't have the same need for sex that you do, so
it's not a need.
It's not a need. Yeah. How do I know you're not just making this up? Why don't you just control yourself? Why don't you just deal with it?
Exactly.
And so I think it's become very one-sided, where women want all the benefits of marriage without any of the responsibilities. Now, I know in saying that, people are automatically like, that's so old-fashioned. Yeah. You just think a wife has to perform her duties and give sex to her husband because he wants it? No, that is not what I'm saying. And first of all, for sure, I want to clarify, I am in no way promoting or teaching that it's okay for men to manipulate their wives or to demand sex or any of these other things. This is not a relationship of slavery or whatever. I'm not promoting that at all.
Let's really clarify this. Our message today is about good men and good women.
Yes.
With high morals, high standards, high values, who want to be their best and want to create a message. Or want to create an extraordinary marriage.
It's not about manipulation. It's not about control.
It's not even about a dude who is only interested in sex. He's like, this is my need. I just need sex. And and he just does the deed and then walks away.
Right.
I'm not talking about that guy. That guy needs to be kicked in the package. I'm talking about a good man who wants to be a good husband, who is more than willing to help meet all of his wife's needs, gladly, joyfully, even no strings attached.
Yeah.
Because if I'm like, I'm going to go and do the dishes so that she'll have sex with me, like there's a string attached there, and it's kind of manipulative. I'm going to just consistently do the dishes, help out, take care of things that are important to her, because I committed to be her husband. But I also want and need her to do the same for me.
Yeah.
I'm going to meet her needs because we have a contract. We have an agreement. And ultimately marriage is a sexual contract. Because that's the big difference.
Yes, because this is something we always love to remind people of, and it definitely came up again in this conversation I had on Instagram, that marriage is a sexual contract.
And sex is a marriage contract.
Yeah, that too.
It goes both ways.
While you can have love and connection in all of these other forms with other people, the one thing you can or should not have with other people is sex. That should be between husband and wife. But if you remove that, and especially from a man's point of view, we're just roommates. And part of her argument was like, women want more autonomy. I'm like, if you want more autonomy, don't get married. Be a single, independent woman, and that's fine.
And get a bunch of cats.
And get some roommates. And if you want a male roommate, fine. But don't involve sex. You don't want sex, don't involve it. Marriage is a sexual contract.
The only way you're getting a male roommate that isn't pursuing sex in strange ways is some kind of, quote, neutered guy that isn't has a healthy drive.
And I know that plenty of that is out there and whatever, but that's not who we're talking to.
Right.
We are talking to people who want to be married, who want to have great relationships, and in order to do that, sex is involved. Yep. Now, I've shared my story before, but I want to share a little bit. Again, I totally get it. I totally understand how this idea, and this is why it resonates, and this is why people like this idea. Going back to what you said before, sometimes we like to hear these ideas because they feel good. I fully remember the time when the idea that sex is not a need for you just felt so liberating. It just felt like, whew, I'm free because you don't need to have sex. And I remember so strongly, like almost praying that I could find a way that we could have less sex. Like that's what I wanted. But because I loved and respected you and I was willing to sincerely understand your point of view, not just what I wanted your point of view to be, I searched for the real answers, not the answers I wanted to find, not confirmation bias, but I searched for the real answers. And what I realized was having more sex was going to make our relationship better, not having less. And so I had to change. And when I did, it changed everything. Like we had a good relationship before, but it definitely reached this tension point. And understandably, I was pregnant at the time and I was overtouched and I, just felt like I can't handle any more touch, sexual touch, anything else on my to-do list, and sex felt like a to-do item. But when I switched my mindset about it, that's when everything changed. And our relationship has only gotten stronger because I started to view sex as an opportunity for connection instead of an inconvenience.
And particularly for good men, sex is way, way beyond just the physical act.
Exactly.
It is actually more emotional.
Mm-hmm.
And the emotional connection that I feel to Rachel, and I've heard this from other good men as well, during and right after sex is incomparable. So if people haven't experienced that, or they're not having a good experience with sex, or maybe their husband doesn't have that emotional connection, he's just in it for the physical act, then I can get where that comes from. But for a good man who really loves his wife, the emotional connection that comes with sex is massive. So to hear people say, oh, you can connect in other ways, I'm like, well, yeah, but nothing compares to the connection through sex.
Well, right. But for you and many men, that's the key to your deepest emotional connection. And so it's horrible to suggest that I should just deny you that
because it's not a need.
Because it's not a need from my perspective.
Right.
And ultimately, I think that's what it is. This is the perspective of a woman. But they like to go around teaching it as though it's fact. When it's not. It's not a fact.
Because so many women want to
believe
hear
it.
that.
And they do. All the comments were like, oh, I'm so glad you said this.
Yeah.
I feel so relieved. Yeah, I get it, because I've been there too. But if you really want to build that relationship with your husband, you're not going to stay there. It's okay to understand that. Like, yeah, it's a need for you. It doesn't mean that I have to be burdened by that. But if I willingly take on the responsibility, just like you willingly take on the responsibility to meet my needs, then we're working in a partnership where we can achieve great things together. Part of what she was saying is like, it sounds like you're putting all of the responsibility on women. No, I'm not. But I am requiring that you take 150% responsibility.
And in a way, in sex, the responsibility does fall on the woman. Now, I don't want to be misunderstood here.
Yeah.
Because I have a high sex drive and I'm pursuing you, but I can't have access to your body without your permission unless I just take it by force, which some horrible people do. And that's unacceptable. So actually there is, and okay, let's just play out.
And it generally is the lower desire partner that is the gatekeeper to sexual access.
Yes. So then the responsibility, in a way, don't misunderstand me, the responsibility in a way does all rest with you.
Right.
Because I want sex every day, right? But I don't get it every day. And in fact, in our relationship, it is a healthy, respectful relationship. I only get sex when you grant it.
Right.
for a word, right? So in a way, yes, all of the responsibility does rest on you, and that's okay to shoulder that responsibility. Like, there's so much responsibility that fully rests on me. And of course, in weak moments, we want to shirk it. We want to say, that's too much of a burden. Oh, I don't want all that responsibility. I don't want the ownership. I don't want to take on that burden. And you're like, stop. Like, for men, that's what I say to men. I'm like, dude, you are the king in your kingdom. Own that. All of it. Take on all the responsibility, dude. It is yours. Everything that happens in your kingdom falls under your responsibility. You own that. You don't have to do everything. You can outsource, you can oversee it, but everything that happens in your kingdom is on you, and own that responsibility. And so I fully shoulder all the responsibility that falls on me. And in a unique way, maybe a little different way, that responsibility does rest with you, because I the only other way to get it would be to take it, and that's never going to happen.
Right. And I totally get that, and I think you're exactly right. I think what happens, at least for me, was a mental switch, where before that knowledge was a burden to me, but I was able to change it through understanding.
Exactly.
Through understanding is a great word. Through understanding your viewpoint and what it meant to you, instead of being a burden, became a responsibility that I chose to take on. Yep. So I chose to take on that responsibility.
I love it.
Because out of my love for you, even though I may not always desire sex as much as you do, I'm willing to engage in it because I know what it means to you, just like I know that you are willing to, say, engage in conversation with me or listen to me when I'm worried or stressed or afraid. You're willing to do that whether you want to or not, because that's part of the responsibility you've taken on to be my supporter and my spouse, vice versa. So it looks different, but in a lot of ways it's the same thing. And I think when we deny that aspect for men, that, oh, that's not a need for you, we're somehow assuming that they're just like us, and
Right.
so they have the same needs. It's not true. Like she says here, even.
Wait. Before you do this, can I say something that just occurred to me? The etymology of the word responsibility is perfect for everything we just said. The response ability, the ability to respond
Yes.
to my pursuit of you sexually. It's your ability to respond. When you need to talk to me, or you want to cry, or you need help with something, or help closing
Opening a
all
pickle jar.
the mental tabs, or whatever, right? It's my response ability, my ability to respond to your needs and your ability to respond to my needs that make it work
Right.
great.
That's what makes the relationship work. Without it, you're literally enemies in your own home.
Exactly.
So she says, sex is one way we can stay connected, but not the only or even the primary way. Again, this is from the perspective of a woman.
But it's true.
It's true.
It's kind of obvious. Thank you, Captain Obvious.
But also from the perspective of a woman, because I would say it's not your only primary way, but one of your primary ways to connect.
Hold up, I would say it is my primary way.
Okay.
It's fair to say it's not the only way we connect, because we talk, we work together, we hold hands, we go on trips, we have hobbies, we have interests, we build dreams together, we teach our family, raise our kids. I mean, we do tons of things.
Catch sheep together and goats, and
we connect a lot. But my primary way to connect
in let's say the most intense, most significant, most
sought
deepest,
after, most likable,
most enjoyable,
most all these things. And again, we love our life. We have so much fun. We play together, we work together, we adventure together. We have a blast. We have an awesome relationship. But yes, it's the primary way to connect with my wife. Because all of the other things I can connect with my kids, I can connect with my friends and neighbors and colleagues and whatever. I can connect all the other ways. It's across the board. Those are common denominator. All these other ways you can connect, I can do that with anybody. So but with my wife, there's one way to connect that I do not do with anybody else.
This is a false statement, because it is a primary way to connect with your spouse, because marriage is a sexual contract.
Yep.
I mean, if you look at the history of marriage, it became a thing because it's essentially granting sexual access. These partners have sexual access to each other. That's what differentiates them from any other relationship. That's the primary difference. So I would say that this is a false statement. And then she says, it's definitely not gender specific, neither is talking. So sex is not gender specific, neither is talking. Belonging is a need for both sexes. Yes, it is.
Absolutely.
But the way that we connect, and here's how I've come to view it, and I truly believe that this is true. And I'm realizing it's still a stereotype, but yet because it fits in the bell curve of most of humanity, it works. That for women, their primary, and I'm going to use the word primary way to connect is through talking and communication and conversation and sharing details and information. You know, that's why I'm always like, oh, what did you say? Oh, and exactly what did he, and how did he say it exactly? Like, I want all the details. That's how I connect with you. And when you give that to me, I feel connected to you. Your primary way of connecting is through sex. And when I give that to you, you feel connected. And so we create this circle. If you think about a circle that connects, you could even see it like the snakes biting each other's tails, you know, those circles. I give you sex, you give me communication, and the circle goes round and around, and we stay connected in a circle of infinity. Only when we're fulfilling both sides. So it's not one or the other. It's both, and they are both important. They're both required in order for our relationship to stay whole and balanced and healthy. But we can't just throw one of those out and not, like, we're not going to feel the lopsidedness. We are.
Imagine me speaking to an audience of men who feel burdened by their wife's emotional swings and her need to just talk and cry, and these guys are like, ugh.
Well, I know there's some women out there and be like, that's not fair, I'm not like that, because I used to be that woman.
Okay, but again, we're generalizing here. Obviously we know we're generalizing, because in general it's true. And so we're taking this group, and even these women that were like, I'm not like that. And then a couple days later, she's crying and talking through it all. And you're like, huh? You're not like what? But anyways, it, we're all we can talk about is our experience because
and our experience with working with
the
clients.
Only person I've ever been married to is Rachel, so we can go with that. So your need to do that, and I know it's common with others when I coach other men.
We know that this is true with all the clients
across all kinds of people. So if I'm standing on a stage and I'm like, gentlemen, you don't have to listen to your wife.
It's a myth that her need to talk. That she doesn't need to talk.
Is a need. She doesn't need to talk. She doesn't need to cry. She doesn't need your help cleaning up the house. She doesn't need your help changing diapers. That is a myth. She will not die. And in this room of knuckleheads, I don't know where I would ever gather with these guys. And if I did have them, I would not be saying this. I'd be calling them out. But let's imagine this, and they're like, "Oh yes, so thank you for telling me this, because it has been such a burden to listen to her. I hate coming home
from work, and I have to listen to her when I get home from work, and I have to help around the house, like
and her emotional changes is her biochemistry changes, like, thank you for telling me I'm free from this burden." Can you imagine the absurdity of that? It's insane.
Yeah. Okay, I want to read a couple more comments that were shared. I'm not saying sex is not important or that it gives license to ignore or neglect your spouse, as your post said. Okay, agreed, because that's not loving. Get it? But it shouldn't be used to force, coerce, or obligate women to have sex. I've never said that.
Yeah, nor I.
And we're not preaching that.
Nope.
We're not talking to men or women who are forcing, cursing, or obligating women to have sex.
Never.
That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying, by choice, if you want a better relationship, if you want a stronger relationship, if you want your husband to adore and cherish you and basically kiss the ground you walk on, like Greg does for me, and I'm not joking here. Greg will do anything I ask at any time out of complete love and adoration. One of the ways we've been able to achieve that relationship is because I chose to accept the responsibility of having more sex with you, not less, because I knew it was a need for you. That's what I'm saying. If you want that level of relationship, great. Then accept and embrace this truth. If you don't, and that you would rather have less sex, go ahead. Believe that sex being a need is a myth and have less sex. And you will get those results. You will get that. You'll get those results.
Which almost always end up, and this isn't excusing it, there's no excuse here, it always almost always ends up in some kind of pornography addiction or masturbation or adultery or just
but
resentment for a long time, and a guy who just eventually becomes numb and boring and disconnected because he can't stand being next to you all the time and wanting to love you and connect and knowing he's never going to get sex.
Right. And along those lines of argument, well, if sex is not a need, well, then why is your fidelity to me a need?
Right.
Why do I expect you to not masturbate or watch porn or have an affair? There's no reason I should expect that, because it's not a need for me to have those things, especially if it's not a need for you to have sex.
Right.
So we got to realize the full implications of this. And like you're saying, it doesn't excuse it. And yet at the same time, it justifies it along the same lines of reasoning, right? Okay. You're putting a lot of the responsibility on women instead of making it mutual. No, I'm not. But I am trying to explain your role in this, because like you said before, I hold the key to sexual access. And in fact, I fully recommend that all women read the book The Empowered Wife by Laura Doyle, and you will understand women are the ones that hold the key to happiness in your relationship. Women hold the key.
Which is opposite of what is being said all the time. Happy wife, happy life. And that kind of stuff that it gets spread around. And
women hold the key.
Yep. That's powerful.
Because we are the ones who, one, hold sexual access, control it, and we're also the ones who, through our sometimes ignorance or just, I'll say ignorance because I don't think it's always intentional, are doing things that are actually causing our men to do the things we hate and create miserable relationships. We want them to cherish us. We want them to do what we ask. We want all these things. And yet we behave in ways that produce the opposite.
Exactly.
Okay. So every woman should read that book. So no, I'm not putting all of the responsibility on women, but what I am doing is giving them the responsibility that they should be bearing. That's it. Take your responsibility instead of blaming your spouse for all of your problems. If you shouldered more responsibility, you would have a better relationship because it's an equation. You know, me plus my spouse equals our relationship. Well, if I increase my responsibility, if I increase my capability, we automatically have a better relationship because it increases the sum of the total of both, right? So that's what I'm saying.
Plus, okay, and it's worth saying here that if a woman's like, look, I get this, I hear what you're saying, I want to have more sex with my husband. I'm so sick of him not helping.
Yes.
And coming home and acting like a barbarian, and I'm sick of his temper. And it's just so unattractive, and he's not taking care of himself. He's not leveling up.
He's not attractive.
He's not.
He's being a baby.
I don't respect him. So yeah, I hear what you're saying. I want to have more sex, but I have a hard time having more sex with him because he's not very respectable or attractive
or sexy.
Then that is also the opportunity for more responsibility, like you said, to hold up the mirror to him and say, hey, I need you to level up. And I want to take our marriage to another level. But let's go.
Right. Well, and this is the challenge of navigating all of this because I fully recognize it has many, many levels here that go into play. I remember this specifically happened with us one time. You had been sick for a while and laying around. I mean, you were sick, right? You were laying around on the couch. You were just disheveled. And I remember you weren't fully better yet, but you kind of were initiating, you know, some foreplay or something. And I just told you straight out, like I was honest, and it was uncomfortable and it was a little bit painful. Besides, there were other things going on. We were traveling. There was some uncertainty with like where we were going to be living and all this other stuff. And I told you, I'm like, I just don't feel sexually attracted right now. Like, first of all, you look a mess. You've been laying around like pale on the couch for days. Your breath stinks. And I'm uncertain about our living conditions. Like, I don't have certainty. Like, I feel like you're not providing that thing I need. I don't feel attracted to you right now. And I just told you like that. And I know that that can be painful for you to hear. And it was painful for me to say. But I feel like that's the type of conversations we need to be having. Not just saying, you don't need sex, so just get over it. Blah. No, we have to get, which, okay, this is true. She later in the poster on Instagram says that, like, I'm trying to help women get to the reasons they don't want sex. I totally agree with that. That's a great point.
Agreed. Why start with some irrelevant argument about life and death?
About survival, about not being in need? Yeah. No, and I fully agree with that. Like, and that's a better starting point to me. If your husband comes to you and you don't feel like having sex with him, why don't you figure out why? That's going to be far more helpful than some idea about, well, you don't need sex. It's a myth.
Yep.
If you instead believe he needs and wants sex from me, but I don't want to give it to him, why don't I want it to give it to him? And then if I especially learn the ability to tactfully, I use tact, even though it's still uncomfortable, tell you why, now we can do something with that.
Yeah.
Now we have some power and something we can work on changing. That's far more powerful than simply saying your need for sex is a myth and I don't have any responsibility to meet it.
That you said that so well. The one idea is empowering. Mm-hmm. The other idea is disempowering.
Yes.
By just saying, oh, it's not a need and let's brush it aside. That's disempowering. We're saying, wait a minute, what's off? what needs to be improved, what changes need to be made in myself and in my spouse. That's power. That's real power. And obviously there's some pain there, but where there's pain, there's power. That's how things get better.
Exactly. No, you're totally right. Okay, a couple more things. You're putting, oh, no, I already said that. Responsibility in women. It's both partners' responsibility. Yes. To communicate needs and desires and figure out fulfilling intimacy. Yes. And that's what we were just talking through. So true. Saying it is a need is often used to manipulate women into sex. Well,
that's messed up.
No.
Well, it can be.
It can be. And I get how that can be used that way. But that, again, removing that and saying, no, it's not a need doesn't fix the problem necessarily, because for some reason, this is what we're not understanding. If a man's trying to tell you he feels like it's a need, you've got to understand why. You can choose to be manipulated by it, right? Ultimately, I feel like manipulation.
But there was, as soon as I heard that, I started thinking of instances in our marriage, early on especially, when you would come to me, usually in tears or frustration or anger, and you're like, I need this.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I was like, what?
Not need.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, well, that's strange because I don't need it. Again, I was in this ignorant state of humans are humans. Like, what are you talking about? Like, I don't need that.
I don't need it. You don't need it.
You don't need it. And you would say, I need you to do this, or I need you not to do this. I need it. And I remember just, you can picture my younger self just standing there stupefied, like, what? Why is she saying she needs this? It's so strange. And I wasn't understanding. I wasn't comprehending. I wish if I could go back and start over, I would listen very carefully from the time we start dating. And we're like, I need this. And like, oh, okay. Those are her human needs, feminine needs, in order to really flourish and be her best self. These are some things she needs. Now, not every single thing we think is a need. Like, some people are going to be like, I need a donut every Saturday morning to be a happy person. Like,
I remember one of the responses to, we did a podcast episode about parenting or something, and it said, your children misbehave because their needs are not being felt. And the parent mistook this to believe that meant when their child said, I need to go to my friend's house, or I need to play video games, that's what we're talking about. No, we're not talking about those types of things. We're talking about like the 6 human needs. But back to this idea, in many ways, women can and sometimes do the same things. They manipulate their men into fulfilling those needs. Like, I need you to do this thing. And through tears and anger and the wrath, they are manipulating their men to do those things, right? And so it goes both ways. So I get what they're saying here, that, yeah, this need for sex can be used to manipulate women into giving them sex. But ultimately, you, like we talked about before, you're the guardian to the door.
Yep. If
you don't, and in all of this, I'm saying, if you don't want to have sex, don't have sex. With here's, because Greg's making faces over there, like, no. Here's how I define that. I'm talking about, when I say want, I'm meaning wanting the outcome that comes from it. Because I may not, quote unquote, want to have sex, but I think I want to connect with my husband, and this is how he wants to connect. And I'm willing to do that because of my love for him. But if I, like to be my previous example before, if I'm literally turned off by how you've been for a few days and our situation and all these other factors, I don't want sex right now, because I realize that there's this barrier that needs to be overcome. Mm-hmm. So in those cases, I won't have sex, and instead I'll have the hard conversation. Mm-hmm. So that's what I mean by that.
And make the changes so it's not chronic, because it could go on for months or years of like, well, I still don't want it.
Right.
Because of this or because of that.
Exactly.
And I think you make a great point, because again, the opposite side is you tell a husband, like, well, if you don't want to listen to your wife or help out around the house, then don't. If you don't feel like it, then don't do it. But what you're saying then is, what you really want is to be single, and you will be shortly.
Exactly. Right. So the wanting comes to what you want most, not just what you want in the moment.
Right. And I think it's important to be reminded constantly, like when you decided you wanted to be married, when you decided that you wanted to live with somebody of the opposite sex, you signed up for the differences.
Mm-hmm.
And
and for the sex.
And for the yeah, 100% you signed up for sex. And you signed up to meet the needs, the unique needs of your spouse.
Mm-hmm.
Not, again, not the absurd ones, not the ones that are kind of made up. But I agreed under our automatic contract to meet your feminine needs, even if they aren't ones that I understand or have myself.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I signed up for. And so if I want a great marriage, that's part of the contract.
Right.
I'm going to meet your needs.
Well, and she says this right here too, that men need, I'm going to go back to that. Men need to learn other ways to experience intimacy and feel loved besides pressuring their wives for sex. Yes, I agree with that. I agree with that.
I don't.
Okay, explain why you don't.
Gosh.
Because I think ultimately
only a woman would say that.
Well, okay, but what I'm saying is what you just said before that is proving this point. You are talking about doing nice things because the opposite of that is the guy that comes home and plops on the couch with the remote and just gets to do whatever he wants until it's time for sex, and then
he's more into his phone or his sports teams or his car or whatever. He's not going to be bothered by the kids or the chores or what his wife wants to tell him about her day or whatever.
So you are promoting this. You are promoting other ways to experience intimacy and to feel love besides the sex.
Yes, because there's lots of levels of intimacy. There's emotional intimacy and spiritual intimacy and recreational. Intimacy is like this closeness, this real deep connection. So there's a lot of intimacy. But if we're talking about like deep focus intimacy for a man, if you're like, you just say the word intimacy, he's like, oh yeah, like that is physical, deep connection.
Yeah.
And again, like we mentioned already, that's primary for a man.
And I think you're right, because there could be another way to read this. Because I was at first saying, I was thinking, learn other ways to show intimacy and love for his wife. But she's saying men need to learn other ways to experience intimacy and feel loved besides pressuring their wives for sex. That right there,
she's wanting
that's wrong.
Men. Yeah, that's wrong. She's wanting men to be more like women.
That's ultimately what that is.
And she's like, hey,
that's
women.
That's a woman's perspective saying men need to be more like women. And this is one of the major problems with society today is that women want men to be more feminine.
Yep.
Men are not women.
Okay. I want to really drive home that point. And I think maybe that's the epitome of this perspective we're trying to counter. Is if from a woman's perspective, she's like, look, I can feel real intimate connection through other ways that aren't sex.
And you need to learn how to.
Men should learn how to do it too. They as though they can just learn how to do it. Like, oh, just don't be a man. Learn how to connect like a woman. Like that's crazy. And it's extremely unhealthy. For a marriage, a family, and society.
And this is part of the problem too, because she continues, I'm egalitarian, so I believe in equality and mutuality between men and women. And a lot of what you're saying is steeped in gender stereotypes and unequal gender roles.
Yep, it is. Exactly. Thank you very much. So she's drinking the Kool-Aid and saying that they're all like, it's like we're a whole bunch of like, she's, and again, this is part of society's problem. There's a very big difference between equal and same. She's getting into sameness here. And so they should be the same. Like, we don't need, these men have this sex drive. They should get rid of that and be more like these women. And we just connect in other ways. We sit around talking and have this deep intimacy. It's so fun.
Over a cup of tea.
And yep, there's no need for sex. Just deep, intimate connection without sex. I'm like, no, that is so off. So yes, is this view, quote, old-fashioned? Yeah, because it works. It's a great classic. It's a great classic.
It's been around for hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years. So,
it's like,
it works.
It works. And you look everywhere else in life and you're like, the rooster and the hens and all the other animals.
Greg and I, there's this market once a month here in Portugal where we go and we buy animals and garden stuff and plants and everything. And we went there last Sunday, no, 2 Sundays ago. And I was joking with Greg because he wanted to buy a rooster and a hen, and he wanted to buy 3 female ducks and 1 male duck. And I said, babe, you are so old-fashioned because you want men and women in your farm in order to reproduce. Don't you believe in equality? Like, why can't we just have all men or all women? Why do we need male and female?
Exactly.
This is the type of old-fashionedness we're talking about.
Exactly.
And you think, oh, well, that doesn't have to apply to our relationships now. No, it does, because it's the very foundation of our biology.
Yep.
You can't change our biology. I'm sorry, you can't. No matter how much you try, you're not going to turn that rooster into a hen or vice versa.
And the same in her argument, I'm egalitarian, I want equality. I'm like, hey, I'm totally old-fashioned in that a man has a penis and testicles and a woman has a vulva. Like, yeah, call it old-fashioned. That's what it is. Pretty simple. And it works. And connected to, and again, it's like, oh, you're just referring to, are you going to define people by their genitalia? And I'm like, yes. And connected to the genitalia is all the very, very complex biochemistry.
Exactly.
It's all involved in this entire conversation.
And so that we're not misunderstood, this is in no way saying that you and I are not equal partners.
Right.
In anything. Like, we're equal partners in our business, we're equal partners in our relationship, we're equal partners in our parenting. Like, we share everything equally and we work together, we bear the burdens together, but we still are different people and we have different viewpoints and different desires and needs and wants and ways of manifesting and living and being. We're not the same people just because we treat each other equally.
And promoting
same is not equal.
Doesn't help.
And equals nothing.
And you could take this entire argument and flip it on its head because, like we said earlier, you are the gatekeeper to your body.
Yes.
You are the determining factor on how much sex we have. And so the argument is like, well, men are just manipulative and pushing and forcing women to have. And I'm like, whoa, a good guy
decides.
A good guy is not forcing his wife. He's going to be persistent and try everything he can to try to get sex because he's driven and like drawn to her. Like I remember years ago we were up on this ranch and this huge bull was fenced in by himself out in the field and all the ladies were in the other field and he was just miserable, bellowing and smashing the fence and hitting it and doing everything he can. Finally he swam all the way out into this lake where it got deep enough in the middle where the fence was too low and he was able to swim across and get in. And I'm like, he's going to do everything he can to get to the females. And
sex is not a need for a bull, Greg. You were just full of it.
He needs to learn other ways to connect with the cows.
Like, what is this?
Can't they just talk across the fence?
And I get it. A lot of people are offended by comparing humans to animals, and yet
we are animals.
Right, ultimately, we are animals. I believe in evolution. We evolved from animals. Like, this is our biology. This is our biochemistry.
And to be clear, you also believe in God, and that we believe that this is a divine, godly created way to have couples stay together.
Exactly, like the circle that we talked about, the circle of connection. It requires both. Okay, a couple other things here that are super fascinating. Saying it is a need is used to manipulate women into sex. That's what I've seen in the research and in my clinical experience. First of all, you guys know how we feel about this. If you know anything about this, I don't give a rat's butt about the research or the clinical experience unless it produces results.
Yep.
So if in that clinical experience you have amazing relationships between a man and wife, I don't care. It doesn't matter.
Oh, yes.
Pragmatism. Okay. I'm all about the pragmatism. If it actually works in real life to create incredible relationships, that's what I want.
Then, because it's results driven. I remember meeting a woman one time. She had 9 children, and they were all a mess. Her family was a mess. Her kids were a mess. It was a disaster. And she was going around boasting about how people should listen to her because she has so much experience as a mother. I was like, yeah, you do. You have 9 children, tons of experience, and no results.
Right.
So, okay, so what that you had 9 children? Like, it was a dumpster fire.
Right.
So what that you've had thousands of couples in your clinic, unless they are all transformed, like not all, but most of them are getting amazing results from what you're saying. I don't give a crap. Like, show me the results.
Exactly. Well, and back to Laura Doyle's book, The Empowered Wife, as she says, she's even harsher than we are sometimes. She says basically marriage counseling is like,
it's garbage.
Divorce preparation. Like counseling and marriage leads right to divorce. If you want to save your marriage, do not go to a marriage counselor because they will ruin your relationship because they give you advice based on theory.
It's kind of crap. Exactly.
Rather than actual results. So our standard is never take advice from anyone unless they have the results you want.
Yep.
Period. So I want to see your relationship. That's what I'm going to base it off of. If you have an incredible relationship, then I might believe what you're saying. If not, you've got nothing to offer me. Sorry.
It's like these years ago, we were contemplating establishing a recovery center for youth. And I started looking at the stats and the numbers. The recoveries were less than 1%. It was so bad. And they're saying, oh, yeah, we have so much experience. We've helped thousands and thousands of this and that.
And they're charging tens of thousands of dollars a month.
So absurdly
great
expensive.
Business model, but not a great.
And then, but I'm like, well, I want the exact numbers. Like, who doesn't, who how does get out? And the numbers were horrendous. It was so sad that it just wasn't working. So you're like, you can't boast about all your experience and all the clients you've had. You've got to boast about the changes, the legitimate changes that have been made and real positive results.
Exactly. Okay. Back to the men need to feel other ways to experience intimacy besides pressuring their wives for sex, which kills a woman's libido and sense of autonomy. I can agree that if you feel pressured into sex or you feel the burden of your husband's need for sex, yes, that can absolutely kill your libido and your sense of autonomy. You feel like you're, maybe some slave to your sex drive or something. I get that. But we have to.
That your body just is not your own.
Yeah, my body's just another thing for you to use or whatever. Or sex becomes a check mark on my to-do list. Like, oh, I need to have sex with my husband again. I totally get that because I have felt that way before. And I felt, well, especially as a young mother, when I've got all of these children, 7 children, and I'm overwhelmed with life and I've got all of this stuff going on. And then I've got you and your sex needs. It's just one more thing. It's just too much. I don't have any autonomy. I'm not even a person anymore because I'm just meeting everyone else's needs. I get it. But that changes, going back to what I said before, when I willingly choose to take on those responsibilities and to bear them purposefully, joyfully, willingly. That's when it changes. It's not by denying that all of you have needs, that sometimes I'm the only one that can fulfill. It's by recognizing that that's actually my privilege and my opportunity to be an important part of your lives, to be necessary, which is the irony because ultimately that's what we all want. We want to be needed. We want to be important in someone's life. And yet when the opportunity presents itself to us, we view it as a burden or that we're being manipulated into it or that we have no autonomy. Go live your life by yourself then and have full autonomy and be nobody to anybody.
And one of the most obvious certainties among humanity is that women want to be attractive. I mean,
they want to be desired. They want to be
spend trillions of dollars and do anything they can, clothes, makeup, hair, surgery, anything to be attractive.
Yeah, this is actually one of the ironies, because what women do want, and again with our generalizations, which are true, is that they want to be cherished, they want to be desired, they want to be pursued. Yeah. What that looks like in reality is a man pursuing them for the ultimate end of sex. Yeah. Sorry, that's just how it works. That's the biology of it. There's lots of levels in between, and that's not the only outcome, but that is the underlying driving force, is that. And when we learn to realize that truth and accept it and embrace it and work with it rather than fighting against it, guess what? Everything changes. And now life is actually free and flowing and enjoyable and pleasurable. And now you're having great, incredible, amazing sex. And you feel good. And life gets better and better and better because you're flowing with it rather than fighting it.
Yeah, you embrace it instead of resist it.
Exactly.
I will say this, though. I got to throw down here on the gentleman. Many men, if not most, are subconsciously or unconsciously operating as self-sabotage, and they are killing their wife's libido.
Yes.
By the way they carry themselves, the way they behave, the way they perform,
do their hair,
act,
wear their clothes,
everything, like even physical things like that, how their appearance, but also their mannerisms, their language, their tempers, the way they engage with kids and neighbors and others, their habits and hygiene, the way they succeed at work or just utterly fail, their laziness, like you name it. Men are just operating in total self-sabotage and
then wondering why their wife doesn't want sex.
Why don't we have more sex? Like, well, look at yourself, dude. So there's a gigantic responsibility on the men to be attractive and respectable, and likable, and
desirable,
to do that.
And sexy.
I heard this funny thing. I think I just mentioned it on a recent podcast, but it was by I think John Gray, something. He was like these guys.
The Men Are From Mars guy.
Yeah, and they were boasting about, I will never change a diaper. That's a woman's job. And he says 2 years later, they would all be in my office wondering why they don't have sex anymore. And he's like, duh, right? She doesn't respect or like you, appreciate you. It's not sexy, but like when you're really leaning into being a man in that full sense of what it means to be a man,
shouldering responsibility.
Yeah, it's sexy. It's attractive. It's respectable. And so guess what? Her libido goes up because you're doing things that are attractive. You're serving people. You're helping people. You're doing hard work and taking on challenges. That's sexy.
Absolutely, it is. Right. When you are working and making things nicer for us, or even if you're dressing up, taking me out to dinner, paying for dinner, all of that is very attractive. And so all of that goes into increasing libido. So yeah, if your spouse is sitting around doing nothing and then expecting sex, yeah, that's not going to happen.
Sitting in the corner grumbling like a little baby. Why want to have sex with me? He's like, look at yourself.
Okay, we're almost done. Next in belonging are needs, but sex is not, because you can live or survive without it, whereas attachment is necessary for survival. Okay, like we talked about before. Yes, with the experiments of babies dying when they don't have attachment. Yeah, you're right. That's more of a live or die need. Point being, that's not the conversation we're having, and that's the ultimate problem. We're not talking about just living or dying. We are talking about, we're talking about the relationship living or dying. If you want the relationship to live, a marriage relationship needs sex, period.
And as you say that, I would say in our relationship, you and me, inside of a marriage, attachment is through sex. Not only,
right,
but it is through sex for sure.
And that, of course,
like she's saying, attachment is needed. I'm like, from a man's perspective, as from a husband's perspective,
and this attachment to you is sexual. The rare circumstances of where sex is not an opportunity in a relationship. If something happened to you and you lost the bottom half of your body and we couldn't have sex, yeah, we would still be married. We'd still have a great relationship. But that's the exception, not the rule. The rule is most people in a marriage are able to have sex. So if you're able to have sex, you should be having sex. That's the point. And so we can't be arguing to this extreme of, well, it can exist in relationships where there's no sex. That's not the point. We're talking about average relationships that can become extraordinary by having more sex rather than less sex.
I love that word that just slipped out, extreming.
Extreming?
We're going to start using that. It's like, hey, you're extreming. You're using arguments. They're so far out there, they're kind of irrelevant to the conversation.
Both men and women need to take responsibility. We already addressed that. Tending to the partner, you seem to put all the burden on women. No, she's like, this is the second time she's bringing it up. And so I think.
Why is she so afraid? Hold on, I know we touched on it, but why is she so concerned about women
being on the women
having the responsibility? Can you imagine? Is she assuming that the men should bear all the responsibility?
Because that's also a faulty conclusion. The burden should not. No, here's the truth. The burden is on both.
Yeah.
Both bear the burden.
Like I feel like I need to take 100% responsibility, and you need to take 100% responsibility.
Sometimes it's more than that. It's like 150. It's 200%.
There's no such thing
as.
But it's definitely not 50-50.
No, definitely
not. I take 100 and you take 100, and it just works. It almost seems like she's just trying to pass on responsibility, like,
or put blame somewhere else.
Yeah, well, where's she going to push it? She's pushing onto men. I think maybe inadvertently she's like, well, no, it's on men, and they need to stop saying it's a need. It's not a need. The responsibility shouldn't land on the woman. Like, why are we afraid of responsibility?
Well, she is saying both men and women need to take responsibility for improving the relationship.
There you go. Good.
True, but you seem to be putting all the burden on women and not making it equal. I guess I'm confused about why she thinks that that's the point we're trying to make.
Especially if you just say, oh, no, sex is a need.
And then maybe all of a sudden, that's it.
Boom.
Maybe that's it. By saying sex is a need, we're now putting all of the burden on
the
women, as though we've already made the opposite argument, as though a woman's need, whatever a woman's need is, like every woman's different. Maybe it's talking, maybe it's cuddling, maybe whatever it is. What's your need? You're somehow saying that what? So that's not a need because his sex drive is not a need, or yours is a need and he needs to have the same need. It's almost like it's that. I have the need to connect this way. He needs to learn how to connect primarily that way.
And isn't that putting all the response?
Right.
But again, I'm not afraid of responsibility. If you need me to listen to you, need me to talk to you, need for me to help you out, then that's putting, quote, all the responsibility on me to help you. Great. I'm not afraid of responsibility. I don't shirk that at all.
We've actually talked about this a lot because we have a very unique lifestyle. We have a very unique relationship. As a result, I mean, for the past 18 years, we've traveled to 53 countries. And so in some ways, we've lived which seems ironic, like we've been all over the world. We've lived a very global, cosmopolitan lifestyle. It's also been, in a way, a very sheltered is not the right word. It's kind of what's the word? I can't think of it.
I don't know. Protected, encompassed,
isolated in a way. And the reason for the isolation is that our family unit and your and my relationship are the primary relationships in our life above everything else. Because when we go from place to place to place, it's you and me and our kids. Besides the new people that we meet, but it's a temporary thing. So because of that, we are best friends, but I primarily have you as the person I talk to. So I know that that's unique for many women because a lot of women have their friends, their neighbors, their mothers, their sisters that live nearby. They talk to them all the time. I don't generally have that, right? And so I know that times, and I'm sure you felt it, that my need to rely on you for talking, for communicating, like I don't have another outlet for that, if that makes sense. And so it becomes a higher burden on you that you could very easily say to me, well, it's not a need, or it's not this, or you're requiring too much, or there's too much of a burden. And yet that is just what it is. Like,
but it also leads to greater intimacy.
well, that's the other thing too. That is partly also the quote unquote secret to our great relationship, is that we are each other's only outlets. Me for communicating and talking and sharing and connecting, and you for sex. Like that's it. We've got each other. And that has strengthened our relationship and made it even more powerful rather than weakening it. So it's kind of fascinating and interesting that, in this effort to remove the burden of meeting another person's needs, in a way, you're ultimately weakening the relationship. If you were to say to me, I can't talk to you, why don't you call your mom, or why don't you call your sisters, or why don't you go talk to the neighbor or someone else, get some friends, that would ultimately weaken our relationship because we spend less time in communication. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and especially intense or emotional communication.
Right.
Gosh, and then some people might say, well, a woman, well, just go masturbate, or go look at, like, go away, go look at porn, and so all that emotional, sexual energy and drive is wasted somewhere else.
No, you're right, because
instead of with her.
If you think about all of that in terms of energy on like a metaphysical level, all of the energy that I feel that needs an outlet, that many women, the source of their outlet is women friends or whatever, like I mentioned. If all of that is instead directed towards you, and the same thing, all of your sexual energy is not just dispersed in, some men work a lot more, or they get projects or sports or porn or masturbation, and instead is directed towards me, we increase the amount of energy in the relationship, which gives it the fuel, the rocket fuel, to propel it into an extraordinary status. And I think that's exactly what's happened in our case.
Absolutely.
So it's an increase of those things, an increase of all levels of intimacy that has given us the power we have, rather than dispersing it in other areas by believing things like, that sex is not a need, or that I don't have to talk to you, or whatever. Like, it just disperses that energy.
All that energy, if you reject me or divert it, like, it just, in order to do something with the energy, men are going to look somewhere else, to sports or work or TV or whatever. I mean, but if we accept and embrace all
and
that
take
energy,
on that quote unquote burden
and the responsibility, then it's better.
It builds the relationship rather than weakening it. Okay. Sounds like you're saying marriages in which they aren't having sex, whether postpartum, health issues, surgery, older age, can't be great, since you think sex is essential for that. In a way, yeah, that is what we're saying. At some level.
Understanding the exceptions. Again, she's extreming here, to use your word. We're not talking about somebody who's had a surgery or is ill or has a disability. We're not talking about that.
And we're not talking about great marriages either. We're talking about creating something extraordinary, just like we said. All of the energy is being put into making the relationship extraordinary. And the more energy you put in, which in some ways, the more talking, the more sex you put into the relationship, the more extraordinary the relationship is going to be.
And I think what she's saying here is weak, because what she does is, like, she's talking to you, saying, well, what you're doing, Rachel, is saying these marriages that have these exceptions can't be great. It's like, no, we're not talking about the exceptions. We understand the exceptions.
Right.
We understand
and someone needs to talk about the exceptions, and someone needs to address the exceptions. Great. But to take the exception and make it the rule,
exactly,
that's a problem.
That's the problem right there. Hey, well, these people with an exception can make it work, so everyone else should too. Nah, that's the problem.
Exactly. Okay. It's basically done here, but let's see. I'm more interested in helping women or couples uncover the reasons why they don't want to have sex I agree with that. I think that's very powerful. But I ultimately feel that telling women, wait, let me finish, why they don't want to have sex or have a discrepant desire from their partner, then burdening women solely with that responsibility and shaming them into obligation sex by saying their marriage can't be great unless they give their husband their need. Well, this, first of all, that's not what we're saying at all. But if you really want to help couples uncover the reasons why the woman doesn't want to have sex, or whoever in a relationship doesn't want to have sex, that's better going to happen when you have understanding about why the other partner feels that sex is a need for them.
Right. She'd be better off saying, hey, at a certain level, it is a need for them, and let's work through and see how we can do that. That would be way more effective than saying, oh, it's not a need, and kind of pushing it aside and getting rid of it. Like, you're less likely to get to the root of the problem because you're giving them an out.
Right. You're giving them an out. And I don't think giving people an out helps them
do the hard work,
take on the responsibility.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yep.
And so,
well, and kudos to this woman and her work. Like, that is the key to, like, let's get down to the bottom. Like, what are the issues, and let's solve them. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Totally agree. That's awesome. And what a great work. Such an important work. But discounting it and passing it off and brushing it aside and giving them an out, that doesn't, it's not powerful enough to get to the core issues that are hard to get to and deal with.
Right. And I think it's simplifying the issue in such a way that it can't be a permanent solution, because the real solution is far more complex than that. It involves the fact that, yes, on a level, the survival of the relationship does need sex, except for the exceptions. But we're not living with the exceptions. We're not the exception. We're normal people. That's who we're talking to, with normal relationships. And if you want it to be even better, you have to embrace this aspect of it.
Love it. Beautiful. Okay. Good. You guys, this was a long haul again, but it's so important. It is at the core of a marriage, and it's worth these reminders. It's worth deeper understanding and study and work. We wholeheartedly believe that this is a core piece of a successful marriage, a sex-cessful marriage, and it's worth the reminders. It's worth repeating. It's worth the study, the thought, the research, the experimentation, all of it. Lean into this, you guys. Make it a priority.
Well, it reminds me of, we actually did a coaching session or presentation about it with that title, that sex is the linchpin. And the ultimate premise that we gave, which I think we also talked about in all of this podcast, is that at the center of your relationship is sex. It is the linchpin that holds your relationship together. And I know what we already talked about, that we feel, oh, well, you can connect in other ways. Yeah, but in a truly strong marriage relationship, which is a sexual contract, that sex is at the center. And when the sex gets better, everything else, all of the spokes off of that central linchpin in the wheel of your life, they get better because the sex gets better. Trust me.
Boom.
It happens.
Love it. Okay, you guys, if you found this helpful, share it. Take a screenshot. Share it with friends or family.
Conversation needs come up. Questions, comments, you can email them to us, support@extraordinaryfamilylife.com. You can also leave us voice messages on our podcast page.
Well,
and we can respond.
The big piece here is now how to implement all the other strategies to make the sex work. And that's what you and I do. So you guys can follow us on social media, reach out, download the Be the Man app. You can join our coaching groups.
We have other podcast episodes about sex, at least 4 others, that are very helpful.
So that's what we're doing. We live for this, to give resources and tools of how to actually implement all this stuff. And it's amazing, like all these different pieces that have to fit together in order to make great sex work consistently. So there's a lot there. So we're happy to help. We love it. Thanks, you guys, for listening. Love you. Reach upward.